For more than 15 years, I worked in the shadow of the World Trade Center. First, 1 block north on Park Place, overlooking the Hudson River. Later, I worked in the architecturally significant Woolworth Building. Built in the early 1800s, it was then the tallest building in the world. And finally, at 110 Church Street, which became the final resting place for one engine of American Airlines Flight 11, which at 8:46 a.m. on a bright September day in 2001 crashed into Building 1 of the World Trade Center and seared into our memories the event known as 9/11. In commuting to my offices from Brooklyn Heights, I frequently took the subway that stopped at the World Trade Center. How well I remember taking the shortest route to my office, walking across the 5-acre white marble plaza. This so-called public space formed the courtyard of buildings 1 and 2. I was an ant, dwarfed by 2 enormously cold box-like towers, which the critic and writer Lewis Mumford called those glass and metal filing cabinets. The so-called public plaza was built above street level after the local streets and avenues had been bulldozed. It was devoid of trees, benches, and for most of my time in the area, sculptures or anything living or of human scale. Frequently, strong winds created by the towers, sometimes reaching 60 miles per hour, swept down the buildings and across the plaza, making passage dangerous without holding on to the ropes strung across that barren space. Few foolish souls ventured that path. Like most of you, I will never forget what I saw on television and experienced on September 11, 2001. Fortunately, I was not in New York City that day, but on eastern end of Long Island with family members who had gathered to observe my mother's death at age 88. We mourned not only her death from natural causes after a long life lived well, but also the deaths of over 2,600 mostly young and vibrant souls whose lives were snuffed out so shockingly. The tragedy touched us all and changed our lives. It provided the pretext for fighting terrorism the world over, and thus began a 2-decades-long war in Afghanistan. It sparked the spread of Islamophobia. The FBI, the CIA, and Homeland Security developed investigative and screening techniques based on racial, cultural, and religious stereotyping. During the past 2 decades, we increasingly became a nation of frightened and suspicious citizens, where many were ready to sacrifice our ideals of civil rights, liberties, and justice to counter the threats of terrorism. Before the dust had settled and the tons of debris had been removed, planners, citizens, and politicians turned to envisioning the recreation of a new World Trade Center. Urban planning theories and practices post-World War II were influenced by architects and builders like Le Corbusier, a pioneer of modern architecture, and Robert Moses, the 1950s master builder who molded modern New York to fit his vision for the city. Their theories and practices influenced urban planning for decades. This planning approach resulted in the demolition of large swaths of the city, obliterating historical, residential, and commercial communities, and replacing them with the likes of large urban megamalls, office buildings, superhighways, and housing projects. This was a top-down style, supported by government, banks, and businesses, often without input from the general public. Beginning in the 1960s, new theories about how urban planning should be approached began to gather strength. Published by Random House in 1962, The Death and Life of Great American Cities influenced the course of city planning. Its author, Jane Jacobs, was a resident of Greenwich Village, a vibrant residential and commercial area just north of the World Trade Center, home to a widely racially, sexually, and economically diverse population, and alive with a mix of commercial spots, restaurants, jazz clubs, coffee houses, offices, small manufacturing spaces, an old age home, a hospital, and public housing. Jane looked at what elements made for vibrant neighborhoods and livable cities. She looked at what existing and who lived in these neighborhoods and how existing conditions provided mutual support. Jane looked closely at New York City's famous street grid patterns, avenues that run north and south, and streets running east and west. She studied sidewalks, pedestrian traffic, and what and how they contributed to a vibrant city. She looked at street life in the mix of residential and small commercial spaces, the corner store, the importance of front porches and stoops. Jane's widely popular and influential work focused on the strength and importance of existing communities, listening to and organizing voices of a community, a bottoms-up approach to development and renewal, rather than imposing a redevelopment plan that might look good on paper or in clean scale models. Jane's writings and lectures and political activism offered a different path than the one offered by those who pushed for giant bulldoze projects of urban renewal. Her theories and methodology provided a counterbalance to Le Corbusier and Moses and became increasingly accepted, taught in college and universities, and utilized in contemporary urban and regional planning. After the destruction of the 7 buildings of the World Trade Center, a blueprint for transformation began to emerge with collaboration from residents, community leaders, local stakeholders, and importantly, families who had lost loved ones. This blueprint was influenced, at least in part, by the teachings and ideas of Jane Jacobs. The original street grids were largely restored. The new World Trade Center Plaza returned to street level, offered an easily accessible and usable human-sized space to sit, read, relax, and reflect. Birdsong can be heard from over 400 ash and oak trees in the plaza, green in spring and summer, brilliantly multicolored in the fall. The memorial twin reflecting pools built in the footprints of the original towers, each nearly an acre in size, features the largest man-made waterfall in North America and offers space to pay homage to those who lost their lives in September 11th. The single new World Trade Center tower, 1,776 feet high, 1776, the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, was completed in May 2013. In many ways, it looks to the future and incorporates many of the lessons learned from prior decades of urban redevelopment and scientific advances. This skyscraper is vastly more energy efficient, more ecological than what was destroyed on September 11th. It was designed to eliminate those 60-mile-an-hour winds which swept down and around the old towers that made the old plaza unusable. This space is open to light. There is a new, dramatically improved public transit hub linking the entire New York and New Jersey metropolitan region. The overall design and resurrection of the World Trade Center is a testament to what can be achieved by looking to the future, by listening to the voices of the community, and by applying lessons learned from the past. In the face of the terrible losses of September 11th, 2001, together we built back better. So may it be.